Class changes of Midnight, it's finally time to tackle them. Now, when we heard about combat add-ons dying in Midnight, we had a lot of questions, like, has Blizzard gone mad? There's no way that people can play this game properly without their weak auras, because we've had aura tracking add-ons for years, and designers have built our specs with that in mind. Well, Blizzard responded with a blue post on combat approachability, and they're attempting something that we haven't seen since Legion, and that is revamping almost every single spec in World of Warcraft, in this case to make them easy to approach, easy to understand, but still hard to master. That is Blizzard's goal. It takes a hell of a lot of change to pull it off, and a hell of a lot of pruning. Your class has almost certainly seen gargantuan change, so today it's time to find out, after weeks of gameplay and research, which Melee DPS have won and which have lost. Now, if you want the superpower of coding, listen up, because most coding courses are kind of absolute bollocks. I mean, between the lectures, the textbooks, lacks of structure, and that is why I recommend today's sponsor, Boot.dev, because they have built something that is different, that is specifically for gamers. And I say that being a BEng computer science, the stuff I went to university for. So when I say I think Boot is absolutely awesome, that's because I actually know what coding stuff is. Now, their founder, Lane, reached out to me years ago because he's a WoW player. And since then, he's got 750k students. Over that, they've completed 33.7 million lessons, so people are using Boot. And that's because it just teaches, I think, incalculably better. Now, they teach back-end development. That's the kind that lands you those lovely 100k plus jobs. It's through a proper 12-month paced program that is structured like a role-playing game. Now, you'll be learning TypeScript, which they recently added. I'm super happy about that. Go and Python, from the fundamentals right through to building actual real projects. So it's not some learn to code in 2 weeks scammy thing that just floods the market with another vibe coder with another SaaS. No, Boot teaches you the fundamentals that separate professional developers from people shipping security nightmares. And most of all for me, it's got the sauce, it's fun, it's well structured, the XP, the achievements, even the boss battles, the likes of Boots, and essentially the craft of how it is actually made. You can tell they give a shit. But the best news is you can get 25% off your first purchase at boot.dev/Bellular. The way to save the most would be to do the annual plan, and you can do that with the confidence that if you are not happy, they will refund you on the spot. And you know what? You can actually go and browse all of their content for completely free. And you only got to pay whenever you want the game side of things. Unholy DK. Right, the most important thing here is actually what you're leaving behind, and it's festering wounds. They're gone. That means no more aura tracking wound stacks, no more frustrating target swapping. And Festermite has also been changed as well, so when you want damage, you actually get it. There's no need to min-max your wound popping to get that crucial strength buff. But what's replacing this? Well, the answer is ghouls. Lots of them. It's a new mechanic where when you hit Festering Strike, you strike Blight on your weapon, and then when you Scourge Strike, that Blight summons in a lesser ghoul. Then Putrefy commands the ghoul to blow up, and that triggers a cascade of your talents. You get effects like frenzying other ghouls, stacking up haste, and reanimating that exploded ghoul as a caster. And to lean into this even harder, you're back to using Army of the Dead again, where you can upgrade it to summon in an Abomination or a Gargoyle, but it will always dig up a host of lesser ghouls alongside them. Now, to make room for all of these things, some buttons had to go. Apocalypse is entirely gone. Unholy Assault is completely gone as well, which actually does stop some cooldown just overload, wrecking your damage profile. And for a fairly impactful game feel change, Dark Transformation is now off the global cooldown, so you can just get rolling in combat faster. But there is an asterisk, and that is that it's not entirely finished. Death and Decay lost almost every interaction, committing the worst WoW sin possible. It's just a basic maintenance buff. Though I think I know their plan. I think Blizzard want it only as a slow, but they haven't quite fully committed to that yet. Now, if that has you worrying about your cleave, don't. It's actually automatic now, where Scourge Strike will just chain itself. But here's the wild thing. Everything I've said so far is only half the story. You see, one side of their tree is pure minions. It's all about the ghouls and their effects. The other side is about diseases, where Outbreak now also infects your main target with the new one-target-only Dread Plague. And the upshot of this is that it essentially allows a disease build to work out mathematically, where it's going to all be about extending diseases with Putrefy and then using Pestilence to consume all of them at once for a huge burst. And in both builds, the core gameplay is the same. You keep up your diseases, you keep spawning in ghouls to explode, you manage all of your resources like you do now, but with fewer annoyances. Soul Reaper, for example, now activates only in execute range, and instead of just flooding you with more resources, it buffs the damage of your diseases and your minions. Now, I get that this all sounds like a lot, and I'd say that from our playtime in Alpha, it can still feel a little overloaded, where there are a lot of resources to manage between all of your ghouls and all of your diseases. You're pushed hard if you, say, don't have ghouls and runic power ready for when you need them. And Putrefy has plenty of interactions that urge you to track auras and time things carefully, which to some people could be a pain. But with the other auras paired back, I think the core does come through. And our verdict is that Holy is undeniably a winner. It has finally become the melee necromancer that it always wanted to be. It's basically awesome. Playing it is a little simpler for this new addon-less world, but that has not meant it's lost its essence. I think it's actually doubled down on its essence. It also still has plenty of challenge. Though I will say it's not exactly finished because Death and Decay remains a basic maintenance buff. But the core here is strong enough that that little quibble about Death and Decay is not enough to sink it. So it's a big win, and next we have its icy sibling. Frost DK. Here it's the Apex talent that changes everything, but to explain that, well, after patch 11.2's rework, Frost's current raid build ended up being kind of degenerate. You see, their core big ability is quite obviously supposed to be Frostworm's Fury, but actually what they do is they skip out on that so that they can pick up 3 out of 4 capstone talents. Someone took notice of this, and they decided that Frostworm is too cool not to use, so the new Apex talent makes it better, which does force you to use it. But it is quite cool, because now the worm pops a meaty haste buff and returns tons of resources, which makes it feel good and strong, but if you've been loving the current raid build, you may not be that pleased. Now, there's a few other tweaks. As an example, Empower Rune Weapon removes its travel time, where, before there was a bit of lag between pressing it and getting your resources. But you know what? That's practically it for the changes. Obviously, it got a large rework in 11.2, and our verdict is that the changes are perhaps too minor to call a winner, but it's definitely not a loser. It's in a great spot from the last patch, so it's a good thing that it won't change much in Midnight, and Frostworm's Fury, now being doubled down on, is an absolutely awesome spell. But our next spec is an entirely different story. Ret Paladin. You may know the saying, Blizzard giveth, Blizzard taketh away, and here they taketh. So, Divine Hammers is passive. You're also losing some of your passive holy power generation from Crusading Strikes. Yeah, Crusading Strikes has been yoked. They've even removed Hammer of Wrath as its own button, where now it just upgrades Judgment during Wings, which saves you in keybinds, but it does nerf some of your holy power generation. And that comes with even more loss, where it doesn't come up during execute windows, nerfing both execute damage, but also that exhilarating feeling. And it's frustrating for another reason. Hammer of Wrath was an awesome button. Basically, pressing a new key during execute or wings has been a core part of Ret's physical gameplay forever. It was a part of the gameplay pattern, and while it is elegant to bake it into existing buttons, this does lose a little bit of that spec's rhythm. But the big question is, what fills the void? Well, there's an obvious thing, and that is that without Crusading Strikes, you can throw away that swing timer because you'll be pressing Templar Strike. And that means you do actually decide when holy power comes in. And similarly, Divine Toll talents are now tied to your physical inputs. That means no more judgments going off by themselves and giving you holy power randomly. So basically, you control the timing. And you've got a new talent that refunds your next holy power spenders after using Execution Sentence. And Execution Sentence itself got upgraded, where it's now got Final Reckoning built in, and it funnels your AoE damage to your main target. And this is part of a broader pattern that we see, where passives are getting removed, where base damage is getting buffed to compensate. And for an example of that, Divine Arbiter was purely passive, but now that is dying in order to let your finishers hit harder. So you see the pattern, right? They're at best removing randomness and passives, they're putting it on the buttons you actually press, and in theory that should mean you feel like you got more control. And the only major random effects that survived in Midnight are your Blade of Justice and Divine Storm procs. So, verdicts. Despite that asterisk about Hammer of Wrath, I actually think Ret ends up as a bit of a winner. And I say that because you're now in full control of when and where you get your holy power. Basically, it's all you, and you'll either love that or hate it. I should mention one bit of a pain point, and that is that Shield of Vengeance is rolled into Divine Protection, so you do lose a defensive button, but on a Paladin, you're fairly survivable. That shouldn't be too painful, but it is a nerf. Here's what's interesting. If this really is Blizzard's direction, and could be argued to be Blizzard's direction applied fairly okay or fairly well, our next spec is a massive victim. Havoc DH. Right, one of Blizzard's stated goals is removing abilities without meaningful gameplay. Let's see how that went. Well, in the Great Pruning, Havoc has lost Fel Barrage, because nobody used it. Glaive Tempest has become a passive that triggers automatically, and Sigil of Flame and Spite are both gone. They were awkward abilities to target, they ended up being a bit fire and forget, but that does have an impact. Without them, you lose bursts of fury on pull, and now you're only relying on Immolation Aura, and compounding in that, Fellblade actually gives less than half of what it used to, and it no longer resets. All of this reduced fury generation creates issues on Alpha, where clearly the intent is to shift your focus towards the resource management. But Havoc relies on 3 separate layers of RNG to get said resources to manage. Now, playing well does still require skill, and the spec's core is unchanged, but there is a whole lot more downtime. Now, that being said, the pruning has left us with something actually unique. So Netherwalk as a button is now gone. Instead, it's an option to buff Blur. And what it does is it adds movement speed, but also a 2.5 second invulnerability. Now it's got 2 charges, and it's got a short cooldown. And in effect, that's actually given Havoc a timed parry button. So if you can time this with big raid wides or crazy mechanics, you'll avoid a lot of damage. And that may make Havoc one of the most cracked specs in this expansion. But of course, with a window that is that short, it'll be easy for people to miss and instead get themselves smacked. And the trade-off for this is you don't have a long invuln. But okay, verdict. Havoc's a loser. Look, the blur parry window thing is fun, and the class tree has actually got an upgrade, especially the new glide speed. But the button pruning and the fury generation crisis, that's made an already simple rotation just more frustrating to play. Without your Sigil of Flame and Spite, you're relying on Immolation Aura alone, and your Fellblade is gutted, and the result is just miserable downtime. Maybe boatloads of gear. Almost definitely boatloads of gear will make these things feel better, but I think we're not starting off in a great place, and even after all this, you're still left dealing with 3 layers of RNG to get your resources. Feral Druid. This one is a close call. It will be controversial, though some will love it. So here's the deal. Blood Talons is dead, Adaptive Swarm is gone, and your AoE is now handled by a new multi-target Feral Frenzy. Even Brutal Slash is gone, and that drops single target to laughably simple levels. They even made sure to remove Thrash from Moment of Clarity too, which basically draws a line in the sand. A line that says, no snapshotting except on Stealth Rakes and Tiger's Fury Bleeds. Not even on Sudden Ambush. And that does leave Feral as an embarrassingly basic spec in so many ways. You manage your energy and your combo points, you refresh your bleeds, but that's it. But it's actually not it, because Ferals have got a lifeline in the form of a new ability called Chomp. And this is the game changer. Chomp hits like a truck, and it's got a short cooldown. But it has a catch. You can only use it when you're under 30 energy, which is a fairly unique gameplay mechanic, and it's one that creates an optimization puzzle. You have to plan around having under 30 energy every 20 seconds, and you have to do that without wasting your combo points. Getting this right will be the difference between good Feral players and great ones, unless, of course, balance is a mess and another build ends up being better. Now, on the philosophy side, damage modifiers are getting pruned across the board, and here that does smooth out Feral's damage outside of cooldowns, which is quite good. It means when you hit your buttons, they will basically feel like they hit harder. The whole spec is simplified, and the weight is now just put on executing the basics as perfectly as possible. Now, over on the utility front, Feral has dodged the worst of the utility pruning, though I should say Nature's Vigil and the active version of Renewal are gone, and instead, you've got Heart of the Wild being reworked into being a beefy single-use ability. And with that, our verdict. I said this would be controversial. It's a winner! Asterix. I think we'd call it a loser. Actually, no. I know we would call it a loser if Chomp wasn't here to keep it interesting, because the optimization puzzle it creates is actually solid gameplay with a skill ceiling. That means that the skill ceiling is still there despite all of the pruning. And that means, I'd say, that for the vast majority of players, I think this is a more simple to understand feral that will feel more comfortable to play in the default UI that still has a skill cap with the perfect use of Chomp. I think Chomp is quite clear to understand, and I think for most people that will go down very well indeed. Perhaps the nicest touch is that all of your bleeds have got new icons when they're empowered, which does actually feel quite good, and it's an example of the UI providing gameplay clarity. That being said, if you're a diehard to the most complicated iterations of this spec, I think you'll undoubtedly be disappointed. Arms Warrior. Well, if Feral was controversial, I'll just say Arms is strange. Really strange. As an example, say goodbye to Colossus Smash. Technically, because it's been combined with Warbreaker, meaning that your old icon and animation are gone, but you still do get it. Then there's other odd things, like they removed Avatar and Ravager, but then put them back in again. Yeah, told you it's strange. Juggernaut is completely gone, and Slayer's marked for execution debuff is now changing into a weaker self buff. For another thing, Fatality caps out at 5 stacks, and Executioner's Precision has changed into a buff. But here's the interesting part. I would contend that all of this was sorely needed, because Arms was an absolute nightmare, unless you had a weak aura pack, in which case you'd be having a great time. But outside of having a weak aura to tell you when to best use your execute procs, the cognitive load on this spec was quite insane and clearly not fitting with the design philosophy they're moving into. So they simplified it, and that nightmare is mostly gone. And the core gameplay's got some upgrades too. Tactician will proc even with reduced rage costs, and Sweeping Strikes is now on a charge-based system instead of being on a timer. Modifiers have also been nerfed, which does sound like a bad thing, but the upshot is that every mortal strike you press will actually feel like it does real damage, not just the ones that are buffed. Plus, Colossus Smash can grant Sweeping Strikes for immediate 2-target damage. And then over on the utility side, Ignore Pain has swapped its rage cost for a longer cooldown. That's one half. But now there's the other half, which is Rend. It's an iconic ability for this spec, but it's moving back into the class tree, and it applies in AoE. Now that should make Thunderclap redundant, right? Well, the answer would be wrong, because Thunderclap is still here, and it still spreads Rend, and with a bigger radius. Now, even weirder, your Mastery is now just a flat damage increase, and Deep Wounds, which used to be your Mastery that was all about the bleeds, well, it's now a capstone talent instead, and it's one that's located all the way over here. Now, this all sounds alright, but without Thunderous Roar and Skull Splitter, their bleeds barely interact, and the result is a spec with a solid core, but this weird artifact stuck in the middle. Verdicts then. Okay. I think it's a loser. Even though the weak aura nightmare has been solved, I still do think it's a bit of a loser. Now, there is a lot to love about Arms. I think the core gameplay improvements are real, and having your mortal strikes actually hit, even when they're not buffed ones, that feels good. But it is still a spec that's having an identity crisis, and you can tell. You're still managing multiple auras and still managing the proc vomit. And basically, this spec is meant for one specific kind of player. And I even know one. He's our guild's rather stubborn Arms Warrior who could play Fury, but craves the challenge and usually tops the DPS meters anyway. That's who Arms feels right for. The kind of person who doesn't want to play Arms' Unga Bunga little brother. But the funny thing is that Arms' crises may be bleeding into Fury as well. Here, the patch notes are absolutely goddamn huge, so what I'll do is tell you where it's all taking the spec. Now, most of this is just tweaking under the hood. Changes to Slayer and Bloodthirst talents remove the need for weak auras to optimize you. And the rework also tries to sort out a bit of their capstone talent nightmare, where now it's way more clear that you're actually crafting a build through your talents. And this even shows in how individual abilities work. Take Bloodthirst. It's no longer just filler to enrage you. There are new talents that give it some real damage and set off a whole chain of effects. Similarly, Whirlwind is another spell that tickles, mostly because it's spammable, but a new talent fixes that, where your Whirlwinds that activate Meat Cleaver now hit twice as hard. And it works. The spec feels tighter, less chaotic, and you even get a new toy called Kill or Be Killed. When you die, you don't die. Instead, you become invincible for 8 seconds, and if you manage to kill your killer, you heal back up. I think that's kind of rad from a flavor perspective. But if we look at this spec as a whole, there's something odd. You've got all of this bleed synergy, and that now leads into Rend. Rend, which is located halfway down your class tree, and is more of an iconic arms ability than a Fury one. And I think that goes against Blizzard's new, easy-to-understand goal, and it may repeat the same mistake they made in Dragonflight. Though maybe it's intentional, perhaps to make up for simplifying the use of Execute and removing the likes of Onslaught and Thunderous Roar. Same with the Apex talent, which basically does look like Breath of Sindragosa, Warrior Edition. But to move on to the class tree, well, it is simpler to navigate now, which is good. But they still haven't fully learned their lessons, where it remains full of throughput talents. But still, the new layout and 3 extra talent points will give you the utility spells you feel you need, and the new passive Last Stand adds some flavorful as hell survivability. I should mention that Single-Minded Fury is now fully gone. We actually spotted a data mined passive that would allow Fury Warriors to transmog one-handers, but it was pulled, so who knows what the plan is. Verdict then. It's a winner for now. It feels similar, but they've sanded down a lot of the pain points and they've added in some genuine, more fun with the core abilities. Now, the Rend upkeep and the recklessness maintenance should be enough to keep people satisfied. However, like ARMS, it feels a little bit rushed in how Rend is borrowed from ARMS. You've got mechanics borrowed from Death Knight with the Warrior Edition of Breath of Sindragosa. That's maybe a sign of incomplete or rushed work. Could further develop, so we'll keep an eye on it. But for now, in aggregate, it's a positive. Assassination Rogue. Right, it's been the least messy of the Rogue specs for a while, but I think we all know that's not really saying a lot. Rogues have been messy, and to clean it up, Blizzard have decided to go surgical, and they've excised something once fundamental to the Rogue, and that is stealth in combat. Let's get into it. Indiscriminate Carnage has been a pain in Assassination side for ages, where if you wanted to multi-dot, you would have to use your Subterfuge window to apply your Garrotes and your Ruptures, which ended up being awkward as hell. And it meant constant stealthing, be that between packs, vanishing mid-pack, or just popping off a Shadow Meld. And if you didn't successfully stealth, you lost a ton of damage, and if you did, you're probably still grumbling about all of the tab targeting. So what's replacing that? It's fairly simple. Crimson Tempest now spreads those things instead. So you garrote and rupture your main target, and then you just Tempest them out. Of course, stealth still exists, but it's no longer mandatory for damage. And Master Assassin is also nowhere to be seen. Now, a question is, does the surgery work? Well, I would say that surgery works, but they didn't stop there. They kept cutting. Caustic Splatters used to force these awkward mutilates just to maintain the buff. But now that's gone, and the spells you're already using will activate it. Another thing that's gone from your damage rotation entirely is Shiv, and that does change how crowded your cooldown windows feel. There is a trade-off for this, and that's that energy management matters more now. You have lower baseline regen, but you've got talents that reward tight play. As an example, every bonus and venom you slip in has a different value than before. And the hero taunts have got attention as well, where Fatebound actually works in multi-target instead of being a DPS loss, and Deathstalker's Mark is now easier to apply and pop. That being said, target swapping is still quite rough in Deathstalker. Overall then, our verdict is that with how these changes feel to play, it's a clear winner. The spec is less punishing now, where missing stealth between packs doesn't just tank your damage, and you've got fewer buttons to manage. But playing it very well is still an ask. Energy management is more important than ever, and the new talents really do reward good play. Like, every bonus and venom you slip into your damage window paying itself back. Now, it's not perfect yet, but Assassination is the most sensible and approachable Rogue spec. After playing all 3, it's the only one that feels really cohesively designed. And I think that's not something that's happened by pure luck. But speaking of luck, Outlaw Rogue, you guys have thrown the dice. The results here have been very strange, and the upshot is the casino isn't closed, but the high-stakes table is. So, roll the bones. It defined this spec for a long time. It had a good run of almost 10 years of 5 buff shenanigans and just having a weak aura tell you when to re-roll. Now, Blizzard have torn that apart, and they've rebuilt it, where instead of giving you some unique buffs, it gives you fewer and more simple bonuses. Now, there's still some logic in re-rolling Roll the Bones, it's just based on a number rather than recognizing multiple different buffs. So, if landing big dice rolls and extending them drew you to Outlaw, this will change everything for you. And as for the rest of the casino, well, that's also changing. Crackshot is gone, and so is upper hand and upper hand. Now, so you understand the implications here. Those synergized with Ace Up Your Sleeve to create these crazy stealth-based slot machines where, when you got lucky, you would fire huge in-between-the-eye shots every global cooldown for a while. But Blizzard has actually kept some part of that, where Ace Up Your Sleeve now resets its own cooldown, leading to a fairly similar gameplay loop, just without the need to time your vanishes. It's just like with Assassination, where they've pulled away from stealth, leading to tons of extra damage, and to do that, well, it meant cutting the parts that were punishing, that needed, say, weak auras, or just huge gamer knowledge on exactly when to time your vanish. And to add to this, Ghostly Strike is also gone, which is to simplify an already tight damage window. As for the verdict, it's obviously a winner. But I actually want to make a case for it being a bit of a loser. They cut away the punishing parts. No more weak auras, no more perfect vanish timing, no more losing tons of damage because you mistimed a little thing. And I think in so many ways that's genuine improvement. But a little bit of the soul's been sanded off here. And that's always the risk with what Blizzard are doing. You know, the pirate rogue that used to vanish into the shadows and somehow come back with a freshly reloaded gun. That's not there. You still get the gun thing, but it's a standard random proc. It's less unique. I suppose a unique vision existed there, but it's been sacrificed on the altar of approachability. Now, what I'll say is that on balance, I think this is good for most players, and sometimes it is good to kill your babies. But for some people, it's not. Because while one of your babies may end up just being a bit of a special wee weirdo, sometimes people can absolutely love that uniqueness. And here, there is a tinge of sadness to come alongside the improvements. Sub-Rogue, the mad lads who would be dumbing about the place as a ninja, have had their toys taken away, and there have been changes to how it plays. Flagellation is gone, to no one's surprise or dismay. Cold Blood, the ability that everyone just macroed into secret technique, is now a passive, and as we proceed, you're going to see more and more of this, which I'll just call taming. Another example of that is secret technique. It now has itself a regular cooldown instead of previously where it would just desync itself constantly, which was annoying. Find Weakness is also now a buff on you instead of a debuff on whoever you hit. And then there's Shuriken Tornado. That's now a passive that changes Shuriken Storm instead of just being its own unpressed button. Take Dance Macabre for an example. It required knowing a complex sequence to stack up your damage buffs where one mistake would have you bricking your entire cooldown window. Now, it's just flat damage, so it's more simple. But that being said, Sub is still stubborn. Even after the prune, it still requires hitting Symbol, Shadow Dance, and Shadow Blades at the right time. It still needs you to watch your Shadow Technique stacks like a hawk and plan around them. It still wants you to be behind your enemy for backstab damage and to manually multi-dot with Rupture. So this is a spec that always has scared off new players. Now the question is whether these changes make it any less terrifying. I would say yes. Less terrifying, but not completely. So our verdict, it's a very slight winner, inching towards B tier from C. The changes make it easier to understand. Dance Macabre doesn't brick your rotation, and Flagellation's complexity is gone. The maths is more forgiving, but it will remain a comparatively terrifying spec for new players to try and pick up, compared to Outlaw, which has thrown away some of its identity on the altar of approachability. I think Sub has managed to be more approachable, but still be its weird old self, which I think is good news. So if you've already gotten comfy with it, I think you'll probably like it more now. Enhancement Shaman. Right, for new players, I'd say Enhancement was probably the least approachable spec in the game, quite simply because it had 11 trillion buttons. It was also the only melee spec in an otherwise ranged class, yet most of its damage still came from the ranged spells. And so many buttons, and so many cooldowns, and with an almost invisible resource that doesn't stack up on your screen properly, not to mention a series of random cooldown procs that you would need to react to. It was a great spec, but a kind of unhinged brick wall. So, Blizzard has taken the bulldozer to it. It now has 3 less damage buttons and 3 less utility buttons. Now that kind of pruning should be scary. It is scary, Ice Strike is gone. Hailstorm is gone. So what's left? Well, here's the trick. What Blizzard have done is less prune and more consolidate. One side of the tree is still lightning, the other side is still lava, but now you are always focused on the Maelstrom weapon, which is in the middle and serves as the through line. Go full lightning and you get Ascendance and a Focus and Storm Strike. Go full lava and you get the usual hot hand spammy lava lashes. But either way, things connect now. Voltaic Blaze can start a Fire Nova chain by itself. Sundering becomes a mini cooldown that transforms into Primordial Storm, eating up your Maelstrom weapon to hit harder. And Crash Lightning has even got single target interactions now. And no matter what path you take, Doom Winds is your major cooldown. Pick up Ascendance or Deeply Rooted Elements, and they will cast a Doom Winds as well, so everything synergizes. Feral Spirits is now totally passive, working with Doom Winds and Sundering to summon in specific wolves that suit your damage type. But the question is, does all of this consolidation actually make the brick wall climbable for people? Can a normal person without weak auras actually look at Enhancement and figure out how the damn thing plays? That's the question, though. There's a little more to talk about before we can answer it, and I will say it is quite sad that there's still no Maelstrom weapon display. I don't know, maybe in the last Titan we'll get it. But all that being said, it's the utility situation that is a bit dire. Losing Stone Bulwark and Thunderstorm is going to sting. Now there is compensation. You will get a permanent Earth Shield like Resto does, and Lightning Shield automatically applies all of your other class buffs, and after every Maelstrom weapon cast, you will get to use a turbo buffed heal for free, which is fairly cool. So all I'm going to say is this, for our verdict. It is definitely a winner, actually. Pruning an already lean spec is a dangerous thing, but here they're pruning and consolidating an overloaded spec, and I actually think that's been a success. I think this is an elegant redesign that loses almost nothing of value, yet somehow is lean and efficient. And for the first time in years, I think a normal player could look at Enhancement and actually figure out how to play it. It has very clear builds, it has just the buttons that it needs, and a whole ton of fun interactions. There is an asterisk about the utility, but the core gameplay, I have got to say, is shining. Windwalker Monk. Right, the pruning shears came for this one, and they didn't ask for permission, they just got clipping. What's gone forever is the ultimate source of gameplay bugs for years and years, Storm, Earth, and Fire. Gone. It spent 12 years as a staple of Windwalker, but it has now been unceremoniously shot out of a cannon. Now there is a replacement called Weapons of Order that was quickly renamed to Zenith. Now what it does is it reduces your chi costs rather than just adding passive damage. Then there's your boy Juan the White Tiger. He's not dead, he's, just living on a farm upstate. You can still summon him in the Conduit of Celestials tree, but with him being relocated over there, you have lost Invoker's Delight, so no more big haste on demand. Let's move on though. The stacking buff to Jade Lightning is gone. The button for Jade Fire Stomp is also gone. The stomp itself can still trigger after Fists of Fury if you talent into it, but it's now just some damage and a spell effect. Then there's Strike and Dragon Punch. They're on a choice node now, so you can just pick whatever you prefer, or realistically, whichever one sims the best. Both though will feel very different to play with, despite still having all the same interactions. But the question is whether Windwalker survives losing this much of its identity. I would say that Windwalker feels very pared back as a result. Stripped down, the almost aggressive removal of huge percentage modifiers does actually mean that your base abilities now carry all of the weight. And that does mean that, yeah, you feel a bit better outside of cooldowns. And it puts the focus back on what's always been Windwalker's core: combo strikes whilst managing energy and chi. The dance of not repeating abilities. So yes, it's a huge change, but to be more specific, it's a huge gamble. Is the core loop strong enough to stand on its own? Because after years of stacking buffs, cooldown overlaps, and percentage modifiers, can you strip all of that extra stuff away and actually find something pure and enjoyable underneath? Or will you just find a decomposing body of a spec? Big question, and our verdict, whilst maybe a bit controversial, is that this is a winner. I actually think the gamble has kind of paid off. Windwalker feels like it's getting back to the basics that have kind of defined it for years. The combo strikes, the energy, and the chi management. I think that core loop is actually quite fantastic, and having basic spells actually hit hard instead of requiring your cooldowns to even matter, is exactly what we've been looking for. Blizzard's aggressive removal of huge percentage modifiers and of course putting that power back into the spells has helped a lot. Basically, you're not stacking buffs anymore, you're kind of just playing well. Now, losing Storm, Earth, and Fire and some extra fun bits is actually going to sting. Maybe those things went a bit too far, but Windwalker is at its core, I think, a brilliant spec, and it's one that comes out the other end still striking and unique with plenty of buttons, lots to do, and a clear identity where stripping it down has mostly revealed something that's worth keeping. We saved the fun one for the end. Let's go! It's Survival Hunter. You guys have been updated to allow for dual-wielding one-handers, so you can get the Rexar fantasy. But then Blizzard took a turn, and they made using a shotgun a core part of the spec. Not exactly Rexar's signature, it would fit a dwarf. Dwarves can be hunters, but I'm definitely imagining someone saying, Ishnu Allah, motherfucker, and pulling out a boomstick. Doesn't really feel like Night Elves, does it? And yes, one of the cooldowns is literally called boomstick. Let's get into the changes though. So they removed Butchery, but then must have seen that there was no longer any real AoE. So they added a new thing called Flame Fang Pitch. It's a new ground-targeted spell that leaves a flame patch and sets your weapon on fire for some bonus damage. But unlike almost every other ground target DPS ability, it doesn't have a targeted option, so you can't cast it on a mob, you do need to manually click it. And I think we all decided last expansion that leaving ground effects was a little bit of a problem because, you know, tanks might need to stay alive, so they will move, and then you will lose your AoE damage, because it's dependent on a thing on the floor. Now, wildfire bombs still exist, but they have no real interactions with the kit, except that everything just lowers the other abilities' cooldowns. Takedown is a new thing, and it's your new major cooldown where you and your pet leap into the target together. And the updated Sentinel tree even turns it into a Moonlight Chakram after one use, which is cool. And then the shotgun comes out again, sort of breaking the vibe. Now, let's step back for a second. We've got flame patches in the ground. We've got wildfire bombs with no interactions. We have a shotgun called Boomstick, all on a spec that opened with Rexar's dual-wielding fantasy. It's a bit weird. Now, I do need to say the core loop itself still works. Kill command stacks Tip of the Spear, which you spend on your hard-hitting raptor strikes, and then the follow-up raptor strikes that go after that. That stuff is solid. But then you've got the wildfire bomb thing, the flame fang pitch thing, and the boomstick just sitting there. That means it's verdict time. This is a complete loser, and here's the frustrating part. It's really close to being great. The core loop is genuinely fun. Raptor strikes and the sort of random follow-up raptor swipes, those are cool. Takedown is an improvement. You and your pet leaping into the target together rocks. And the Sentinel tree turning that into a Moonlight Chakram is such an awesome touch. But then there's the rest. The wildfire bombs that just don't have the interactions, the flame fang pitch, which will be annoying, and the boomstick. And these things all feel like they're coming from different games, never mind different specs. Or I guess you could say different races in Warcraft, but they don't come together in a cohesive way. It makes it feel like it has an identity. And that means the fantasy's just all over the place. You've got this dual-wielding Rexar fantasy where you pull out a shotgun and then leave flame patches in the ground that your tank will immediately move out of, all while you chuck in a few sort of limp dick grenades. It's weird, it feels massively unfinished, the kind of unfinished that you actually fear isn't going to get finished. I think this one may just be bricked for a few patches. I think they're the bones of something awesome, but man, they need to work shit out. There we have it. This is the Melee DPS in Midnight. An outright crazy amount of change, and by game director Ian Hazzikostas' admission, one done in only a few months after they announced the add-on changes. Like, yes, no wonder this thing feels rushed. He literally did say that. That being said, though, I think the results speak for themselves. And going through this video, I'm sure you've had a roller coaster of emotions. We may have framed things so that you would have, because there's a lot of things that when I talk about them, they feel like they're bad, but by the time you hit the verdict, and we actually see how it feels when the things come together with all of the consolidation, more often than not, we're actually looking at winners. Almost every spec here comes out meeting Blizzard's goals for approachability while still having a high enough skill ceiling. But some did lose a little too much in the process, but undeniably, Blizzard did what they said they would do. And more than anything, given we now know how quick all this came together, I am shocked they've pulled it off this well. So, did you escape unscathed, or are you starting to consider rerolling to Unholy DK? Like everyone else, even me. It does sound like pretty much the most cool thing there. Now, before we leave, there's a vital thing to understand. We will be doing a full pass of everything again before this expansion comes out, whenever there has been ample endgame testing on reasonably geared characters. But this is where things are looking for now. And if you want to understand the big picture of the prune and even see the kind of unhinged levels that we went to see what the prune actually looked like, you can check out this video next, where we used a custom add-on to work out some fairly interesting things about how the classes are working.